Hey there guys, this is Reckles with WTBGold, and today we're going to be talking about gathering professions in Shadowland. I couldn't write a script about gathering professions in Shadowlands without coming to the conclusion that WoW is a shell of its former self. So, let's dive in. First off, let's just talk about the basics. What do we have to look forward to for the gathering professions in the next expansion? Well, actually, professions as a whole in the next expansion are very similar to Burning Crusade, but like now with even more covenants. Covenants are the build-around feature that everything is tied in with, and how this is put to play in the gathering professions. Essentially, like in Burning Crusade, we had the base ore Fel Iron that was just found everywhere. Well, in Shadowlands, it's Lystrite. There was a super duper rare ore named Corium. Well, now we have Alethium. It's going to be really funny to see how many people in the coming years pronounce this Athelium. But then, rather than one node in the middle called Adamantite, we have 4 nodes, one for each covenant. And these covenant-specific materials are found in that covenant's zone. So, by itself, this just is interesting. It doesn't really tell you anything about the zone other than because Lystrite is found all over, the underlying earth of all these 4 zones are the same, but because each has its own unique ore, the underlying earth is also different. That's about all we can walk away with, which is kind of disappointing because, like, they could have helped tell the story with just simple herb placements. Like, for instance, there are Ravendreth NPCs in Bastion. They would have pollen from Ravendreth on their clothes and maybe accidentally plant some flowers. So, if there were Maldraxxus or Ravendreth flowers found in Bastion, that would be interesting. That would tell either a story of conflict or cooperation, but we don't have that. Instead, all we have is 4 different dungeon quality crafted sets for each armor type. So rather than 4 armor sets, one for each armor type, we have 16, and this is just for 9.0. If we get a new armor set every patch, this is very quickly going to be like Mist of Pandaria, where you just have 100 different sets. The next thing this does is a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. You are choosing, as a player, you choose the covenant that you want your avatar, your persona to be a part of. That covenant represents you, and everything in Shadowlands revolves around this choice of what covenant you picked. Well, if there's different gathering materials, then they're all going to be different prices. The supply and demand aren't going to be the same. But demand doesn't actually even matter anymore because with the patch 8.3 changes to the auction house, you have last in, first out. And what this means is you don't have to undercut anymore as a seller. So buyers can buy up the cheapest thing on the auction house without raising the price like it used to. So the only people who determine the price on the auction house are sellers. Now, BFA had a really interesting fix for this in the fish. There were a bunch of different types of fish, and they could all be converted into aromatic fish oil. And so this created a price floor where whatever the cheapest fish was, people would buy out all of those and turn them into aromatic fish oil, and they wouldn't be the cheapest fish anymore. This aromatic fish oil created a price floor that didn't stop certain fish from being super duper expensive, but it did stop any of them from being cheap and worthless. But we don't have anything like that with these new ore, so prices are probably going to, over time, drop for some of them. And this would be fine, but they're putting so much weight on the decision of what covenant you pick that by devaluing the ore of that covenant, you're devaluing the covenant. By devaluing the covenant, you're devaluing your choice to join that covenant. And by doing that, you're devaluing the player. You feel bad. If the price of Ravendreth ore falls, Ravendreth players feel bad. So, Shadowlands gathering professions, I don't know, it's kind of hard to evaluate these things, so 2 to 3 stars, they're fine. But how could they be great? How could gathering professions carry this new Shadowlands expansion and make it the best expansion WoW's ever seen? First off, let's look at who would choose gathering professions versus crafting professions? For armor crafting professions, you put in a lot of initial time grinding reputation and dungeons and raids, pretty much do a lot of the in-game stuff for each expansion, and you're rewarded at the end of those with recipes for certain cool crafts. So it's a lot of work initially, but then for the rest of the time you play the game, you can just sit in your main city, and in 10 minutes you can craft 10 million gold worth of items. So that's crafters. They would enjoy end-game grinds. What about gatherers? What do they enjoy? Well, at its heart, gathering is super simple. You see a shiny thing, you click on a shiny thing, you sell that shiny thing on the auction house. But let's back up a little bit. Gathering professions are, rather than an initial upfront investment and then infinite return, you're constantly trading your time for gold. But why would you do that and enjoy yourself? Well, backing up again, gathering professions get you out into the world. You are essentially earning money by exploring the open world content and engaging with it. And to explain what I mean here, let's go to one of my favorite farms in World of Warcraft, Northern Stranglethorn Vale. Northern Stranglethorn isn't the most beautiful zone in World of Warcraft. It's pretty to fly around, but the reason I like it is the story that the node placements tell you. So we're going to look at two of these nodes. Bruiseweed is the first one we're going to talk about, and it follows a placement rule. It's always found on dirt up against a man-made structure, which right away is kind of interesting because it's called bruiseweed. Is it implying that man-made structures bruise the natural environment of the earth? Maybe I'm digging a little too much into that. Blizzard tweaked this rule in Northern Stranglethorn, and rather than any man-made structure, it's only found up against troll ruins. So if you see a bruiseweed on your map and you go over to click on it, you have to navigate yourself inside this somewhat maze-like structure of these troll ruins. And while you're navigating these troll ruins, you're going to come across these trolls that are dirty, poorly dressed. They look homeless. I mean, they're living in these troll ruins. They have handmade weapons. They're just not having a great day of it. So by going and gathering this node, what do we learn about the world? Well, there are these essentially homeless trolls living literally in the shadow of their once great empire. Because they're so hostile, we can imagine that they're trying to rebuild their once great empire. That or something along those lines is their motivation. And interestingly, because they're enemies, this herb placement actually says something about the morality of the zone. It says someone trying to fight you in order to re-find a greatness they once had, that is bad and should be fought against. That's something we got just from the placement of a bruiseweed node, but also the people who placed the bruiseweed node working together in conjunction with the level designer and the environment artist and the animators and whoever it is that makes the art of like what the characters are wearing. I don't know what you'd call that person. Now, maybe what I'm saying sounds like I'm stretching or sounds a little far-fetched, so let's talk about Wild Steel Bloom. Wild Steel Bloom also follows a placement rule. But before I say it, what is Northern Stranglethorn? This is the third or fourth zone you've come across in the game so far. You're a little comfortable with navigating the world, but you're still learning. There are still a couple tutorials that you'll need along the way. And Northern Stranglethorn is the first zone in the Alliance side of the campaign with any kind of verticality. Everything else has just been one flat plane. Northern Stranglethorn has mountains you can walk on and ground you can walk on and hills and buildings and all sorts of stuff where you can go up. And this is maybe a confusing topic in a game that was designed for people who are new to the MMO genre. So Wild Steel Bloom's placement rule is that it's always found right on the edge of cliffs. So imagine you're walking along the ground because that's all you know up to this point and you're comfortable with it. And you see an herb node on your minimap. You look over to the right and it's just a wall right there. But you look up and you see the herb up there. Suddenly, it doesn't matter what quest you were on. You have to make a choice. Am I going to get that? If you say yes, that herb node just became a de facto side quest. And these mountains are big enough that you have to figure out how to navigate the world map. So, this mini tutorial works. You figure out how to navigate up a mountain ledge, but then you see the node and it's right at the edge. Are you going to get it? Because remember, you're still bad. You're still a noob, and you don't know how to exactly stop your character on a dime yet. By choosing to go get that ore, you are literally risking your character's life. So why would you choose to get it? Because you are an herbalist and you are proud of that fact. So you walk towards the edge, you stop in time, you click that node, and you are now better at controlling your character on both the micro level and the macro level. This node acted as a navigation tutorial. But there's even more to it than that. The mountains in the northern end of the zone have lots of wild steel bloom because there's lots of ledges that you can run off of and die. But as you start to move south, you get closer and closer to the beach. The mountains become hills, the wild steel bloom becomes more and more scarce. There's still one or two on the hills, but then you go all the way to the beach, and there's one little mound poking its head out of the water with one wild steel bloom and saying, "I'm still here." So, what does the placement of this herb node mean? Well, it could mean that the placement rule of being on the edge of a cliff doesn't actually apply, but there's nothing else that's broken the rule. So, what I think it means is that this tiny little mound on the beach was once a towering, majestic cliff, that this little node poking its head up out of the water used to be a flower that taunted people to come collect it. And isn't it funny that this mirrors the main enemy of the zone, the trolls, who used to have a great, grand, majestic empire, but maybe it wasn't that they were just dramatically overthrown, but rather that their empire just eroded away over thousands of years in a natural way. Maybe they aren't trying to fight for vengeance or to be kings again. Maybe they're just fighting because they're hungry and they just want the world to know, like that flower on the beach, that we are here. I don't know, but I appreciate whoever placed these nodes because I learned something from the story. And here's the funny thing. We haven't mentioned a single quest, a single character. Everything we learned about the story of Northern Stranglethorn is exclusively through placement of herbs. That's what we could have. Or more specifically, the herb placement integrated into the terrain and the level design and the art and the environment and the NPCs and the quest chain. Because the original Blizzard developers made a rule for each individual herb and then chose specific important points to tweak those rules and change them and break them, because of those decisions, we can know the entire story of a zone without ever questing there, and that's super powerful. All that said, Blizzard stopped manually placing nodes after Cataclysm. They've all been automated or had a computerized system in their placement, and we can see that. We can see that in BFA. We've got evenly spread out storm silver and monolite nodes, and it's disappointing. I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out if there's something that controls when it spawns as a storm silver versus when it spawns as a monolite. No, it's just 50-50. Now, maybe you could say, well, in BFA, the story was all about our factions warring together and fighting for the sake of fighting. So maybe the ore nodes are representing them trying to fight for control over the same node. But if that was the case, then you would expect to find, let's say, like, more storm silver over by horde cities and more monolite over by alliance cities. And then in the areas in between, as you get farther away, you start to have the herbs mixing. Rather than it being 90% monolite, now it's 50% monolite. And so the battle rages as you move away from the major cities. Maybe, but that didn't happen. But they didn't try to tell that story through node placement. The worst offender of this is Siren's Pollen, that just has a 1% chance to spawn on any tree in the BFA zones. It's just on trees. You look at the map of this and it's just nodes everywhere. Like, maybe they're trying to say that every tree is actually the same. So trees are kind of up and down, kind of like people are. So alliance and hordes are all actually the same thing. No, they just had new tech and they were like, we can put it on trees. Cool. They have a tool they can use to tell the story, and they didn't care. And this we can see in Shadowlands by just where they are in the development process. In fairness to BFA, though, there was one thing that was pretty cool, and this is, it was part of the rank up system for BFA herbalism, which, by the way, that's an important thing that I left out of the start. No professions have ranks coming into Shadowlands. At least those ranks aren't implemented yet, either in the database or in the actual game itself. I'm a big fan of that when it comes to crafting professions. I think the rank 1, 2, 3 for crafting professions were, I think that was just an unnecessary gating tool, but I really liked it for gathering professions. I think Legion herbalism was an absolute win. It took something that's kind of a slow, grindy, repetitive process and kind of split it up into chunks, which is important to instill the habits that you need in order to properly use and make gold with that. So new herbalists need to know that you do a bunch of laps and then you do a bunch more and then you do a bunch more, and the rank up system can help teach them that. But back to what I was saying, the one saving grace of BFA professions is that the quest text for the rank 1, 2, and 3 herbalism quests were really good. They tried to tell a story. And so one of the herbs, when you pick it, it actually binds to your soul. So the way the Cultirans would use this was that soldiers would go and pick one of the flowers, and it would bind to his soul. And then he would give the flower to his wife, and then would go off to battle. And if he died fighting, or if his ship sank, then his flower would wilt, and his wife would know that her husband was dead and it was time to start mourning. Oh my God, that's so good. That's so sad. It's so poignant. And wouldn't it have been an important detail to include in a main storyline that revolves around multiple members of the Proudmoore family dying at sea? Oh my God! In fairness, though, I don't think Jaina needed a flower to know that her dad died. Am I right? Am I right? Hey, she killed him. Oh. But Derek, though, this is what I'm talking about, though. We used to have beautiful stories told through the professions that integrated with the main storyline, and now they're half-assed trying. Oh, look, herbs in the Alliance zone are blue. Herbs in the Horde zone are red. That's cute. And unfortunately, I think this mindset carries forward into Shadowlands. The ore nodes in Shadowlands took a few weeks to get implemented, but they do exist. You can click on an ore node that says Sinvir, and you get a Sinvir ore in your bags. But for Lystrite, they're still using the Imperium model. For Sinvir, they're still using the Ghost. They're using a placeholder of the Ghost Iron model. So just right off the bat, I want to say I'm not a game designer. I'm not a project manager. I don't know how the workflow of creating a game at this scale happens. But they have implemented the art of the level and the buildings and the characters, and they've implemented all the quests of the full storyline, and they did all that before they put the herb nodes into the game. So I think it's safe to say that they're taking professions and just kind of jamming them into the story. What if they scrapped everything, started with the underlying story, and allowed everything to grow and evolve naturally from there? Looking at how they could have made Shadowlands as good as Northern Stranglethorn, let's look at the story of one of the zones. Let's do Ravendreth. I'm going to be a Ravendreth, so it's what I'm most invested in. No spoilers. Everything here is the first like 2 quests in the zone. Essentially, Ravendreth is where prideful people go when they die. They are caged and tortured until they can release their pride, and the pride is a physical, tangible thing that gets sucked into a crystal or something like that, and then you have it with you as a reminder. But wouldn't it make sense if that process of physically pulling the pride out of you wasn't 100% efficient? That maybe with all these hundreds of thousands of millions of people doing this over the years, that 1% of each pride exorcism was released and kind of dissipated into the air, or dissipated, polluting the ground. So you have this ore node of the Ravendreth Covenant, and what this ore is the earth, but literally teeming and pulsating with pride. What would that mean? How would you implement a rock pulsating with pride into the game? What ore is used to make armor. So the armor you would wear would also probably be pulsating with pride. So what would that look like? Well, maybe the visual indicator of your health bar always shows you at 20% more health than you actually have. So you think you're fine, you believe in yourself a little too much, but your actual abilities were less than that. That'd probably be too confusing for some people. What if each covenant still makes their own armor? That's fine, but each covenant has the armor each covenant makes has different traits depending on what ore it's made out of. Sinvir is pride, overcompensation. It has the same stats as everything else, but maybe it has 20 higher eye level. What would that mean? I can think right off the bat of 2 ways that this would actually be really interesting and not totally game breaking. So maybe this sounds silly, but what's the point of eye level? Well, one, you have gear gating mechanisms, like you can't queue until a heroic dungeon until you have a certain eye level. Well, this allows you to queue a little earlier, so you could get gear faster, but your power level is actually 20 eye levels lower than the dungeon. You are under geared for this content. If you normally rely on gear and just let your gear carry you, well, you're going to die more often. You're not going to be at the top of the meters. In fact, you're probably going to be at the bottom of the DPS meters. In short, you will be humbled. And that's the whole story of Ravendreth, how an entire zone can learn to humble themselves. And in high-end Mythic Plus, there would almost be anti-Ravendreth prejudice, where you would queue up for something and they would like message you and like, hey, are you Ravendreth? Yes, but I can do 32k single target DPS. I know how to interrupt X and Y enemies. I have all my consumables. I've got 2k Raider IO, and I've got Invis potions. So let's go. I can do this. After you have been willing to release your pride by being humbled, you now try to prove yourself based on your real underlying capabilities rather than this meaningless thing of eye level. By creating the armor with this Sinvir trait in it, you are helping tell the story through the social interactions that result from taking a rule of the game and just tweaking a little bit for the story's sake. But maybe that would still be too game breaking. What's another option? Another thing you could do with Sinvir, something that's emanating, pulsating with pride. Your aggro radius. What if every Sinvir ore you had in your bags increased your aggro radius by 1%? It'd have to cap so you don't pull the entire zone all over. So maybe it caps at 500%. With just that and node placements, what can we learn about the story of the zone? Let's say you haven't quested yet. So first off, the more you gather this ore, the angrier everything in the zone gets at you. So right away, you make the connection that this ore is bad. Something is bad about this ore. I don't know what it is, but something's bad. But let's say it's also found around major cities, specifically near these old rusted cages. Something's bad, but the good guys are what's causing it. It's only found near the good guys, so maybe the good guys are doing something bad, or there's something going on here. So let's say you explore the zone and you go up to the enemy castle. You wouldn't expect to find any of this ore, but if you did, this ore is only found where the good guys control, and now it's found where the bad guys control, so either the bad guys are doing the same thing the good guys are, or this castle used to be a good guy castle, and then someone usurped the throne. So the good guys are probably trying to retake the throne. This zone is a vengeance story. And something I really want to see is professions integrated into the main storyline in a personalized, profession-specific way. So maybe blacksmiths and miners get a quest in one of the major cities to go down to the basement and kill this evil spirit down there or whatever. And maybe while you're down there killing this elite, in his dying breath, he says,
"Don't listen to the prince. Go west and seek the hill."
So you can just turn in the quest and carry on, but that would be following the prince. So let's go west and seek the hill. So I'm making all this up just to make a point. Let's say there's a ravine and there's an ogre guarding the ravine. You have to sneak by the ogre. You can just barely get past the ogre without aggroing him. You go up and you see this hill. It's far away from any city. It's out in the wilderness. It's really strange that there's this ogre guarding something. You look out onto this hill and you see hundreds and hundreds of ore nodes. Oh God, what happened here? This isn't a city. There's no cages, so there's no torturing going on here. Oh my God, this is where they buried the people that they couldn't cleanse of their pride. And the leaders of the zone claim to be cleansed of pride, but they can't face failing at their goals of cleansing people, so they unceremoniously bury people here, and the ground has filled up until it's overflowing with these ore nodes that represent the pride that has seeped into the earth. Oh my gosh, should I be following these guys? Should I not? I don't know. But think about the outcome of this. You just, without really questing, just got such a deep understanding of the moral dilemma that you should be feeling while questing through this zone without questing, just by walking around and learning what you can from the placement of ore nodes. But there's something else kind of fun that having the rule set that it increases your aggro radius creates. Here, normally, seeing this hill would be like, oh, cool, free gold. I'm gonna go click a whole bunch of shiny things. When was the last time you saw an ore node and said, oh my God? You not only had the emotional reaction, but if you click on all these ore nodes, your aggro radius will be increased and you won't be able to sneak past the ogre guarding the place, so you will die over and over and over. You learned something new about the story and have to make decisions based off that knowledge. That's what this zone could be. Instead, it's just random ore placed around. You walk up, you click on a shiny thing, and you don't engage with the environment or the storyline at all. And it's boring. Now, again, I'm not a game designer, so I don't know how this works. And maybe I'm just being nostalgic. But, I mean, I really don't have any interest in classic. It's just, it's not that I want Blizzard to tell me the story that they used to. It's that I want Blizzard to tell me stories like they used to. I want to see them put passion into every possible system that they can use and integrate in order to get the story of a specific part of the world across. Shadowlands is fine, but it's a disappointing shell of what it could be. I wish they cared enough to use all the tools at their disposal.